Jung's most unsettling discovery wasn't really about anger control. It was about individuals who rarely, if ever, get angry, and why this apparent immunity makes them psychologically untouchable. In his clinical work, Jung recorded patients with what he described as emotional impermeability. These were individuals who stayed entirely calm when insulted, remained unbothered by criticism, and seemed unaffected by attempts to provoke them. They never took things personally, never reacted defensively, and appeared immune to the emotional triggers that influenced almost everyone else. Jung considered this discovery disturbing because these individuals were not suppressing their feelings or practicing forced detachment. Instead, they had undergone a specific psychological transformation that made other people's behavior largely irrelevant to their internal state, granting them an almost extraordinary level of emotional freedom. He described a case that revealed this insight clearly. It involved a successful businessman who came to him in 1919, not because he was struggling, but because his complete lack of emotional reactivity made others uneasy. This man, whom we'll call Heinrich, had built a steel empire in post-war Germany. Yet his employees feared him, not due to cruelty or aggression, but because nothing seemed capable of angering him. Insults had no effect. Criticism sparked curiosity rather than defensiveness. Even betrayal interested him more than it hurt him. His wife brought him to Jung, convinced something was wrong. "Doctor," she explained, "my husband doesn't get upset about anything. Yesterday, I told him I had been having an affair for 6 months. He calmly asked me 3 questions: whether I was happy, whether I needed anything from him, and whether I wanted to continue the marriage or end it." What Jung uncovered changed his understanding completely. Heinrich was not emotionally numb, nor was he repressing anything. He had simply learned to view his triggers as reflections, mirrors revealing parts of himself he had not yet fully understood. Jung referred to this as the shadow mirror effect. Every person who angers you is, in some way, showing you something about your own unconscious mind. The dismissive co-worker reflects your fear of inadequacy. The chronically late friend mirrors your need for control. The critical family member reveals your own underlying self-doubt. Heinrich had mastered this idea after a devastating betrayal in business a few years earlier. His closest partner had stolen a major client and nearly destroyed his company. Instead of seeking revenge, Heinrich asked himself a single question: what part of me is this person reflecting? The answer unsettled him. His partner's greed echoed his own hidden fear of poverty. His dishonesty reflected Heinrich's habit of concealing his true emotions. The betrayal exposed his own potential for selfishness. By confronting these shadow aspects instead of projecting them outward, Heinrich developed what Jung called psychological immunity. He could now view other people's behavior as information about them rather than as attacks against him. Jung outlined this process as the shadow integration method. When someone triggers you, instead of reacting immediately, you ask 3 questions. What trait in this person am I judging most strongly? Where do I display this same trait even in small ways? And what is this situation trying to teach me about myself? Consider how this plays out. A marketing manager named Sarah found herself constantly irritated by a colleague who interrupted her during meetings. Using Jung's approach, she examined her reaction. She realized she judged his need for attention harshly. Then she noticed that when she felt insecure, she often dominated conversations herself. The situation revealed that her frustration with him was tied to her own behavior. Once she acknowledged this, his interruptions lost their emotional charge. She could see them as expressions of his insecurity rather than personal attacks. This is the essence of the shadow mirror. It turns triggers into lessons. But Jung's observations went further. Those who achieved this level of emotional impermeability seem to access a psychological space most people never reach: the gap between stimulus and response. Heinrich described this experience vividly. "Doctor," he said, "when someone insults me, it feels as if time slows down. Their words move toward me, but instead of striking me, they pause. In that moment, I decide whether to take those words in or let them pass." Jung called this the reaction gap, a mental space where conscious choice replaces automatic reaction. Most individuals experience triggers and responses as a single, seamless event. But those with emotional control learn to separate the two, inserting awareness between them. This finding challenged conventional ideas about human behavior. It suggested that anger is not inevitable and that reactions are not fixed. With practice, anyone could access this gap and choose how to respond. To cultivate this, Jung proposed what he termed the observer protocol. When triggered, instead of reacting immediately, you step back mentally and observe the situation as if watching a scene unfold. You notice the other person's words, tone, and posture. At the same time, you observe your internal response without identifying with it. Over time, patients who practiced this method reported profound changes. A teacher named Maria, for example, learned to observe her principal's criticism without becoming defensive. She began to notice his stress and pressure rather than interpreting his behavior as a personal attack. This allowed her to respond with understanding instead of anger. The key realization Jung emphasized was simple but powerful. You are not your emotions. You are the awareness that observes them. Emotions are signals, not identities. You can choose whether to act on them, analyze them, or let them fade. Heinrich eventually described himself as psychologically transparent. Negative energy passed through him without sticking. He was not avoiding feelings, he simply chose not to attach himself to every emotional impulse. However, Jung found something unsettling about this state. Those who developed it often lost interest in the emotional drama that occupies most people. They no longer felt the need to prove themselves, win arguments, or seek validation. While this gave them strength, it also distanced them from others who remained caught in reactive patterns. The observer protocol required consistent practice, but Jung noted that many people could begin accessing the reaction gap within weeks. The process involved pausing when triggered, taking a conscious breath, observing without judgment, and then choosing a response aligned with personal values rather than impulses. This was not about becoming detached or indifferent. It was about becoming intentional, shifting from being controlled by reactions to consciously directing them. Jung also identified another pattern among emotionally resilient individuals. They developed what he called boundary fortresses, psychological limits that determined what could influence their internal state. Unlike physical barriers, these boundaries were invisible, yet highly effective. Heinrich explained it simply. People can only disturb your peace if you allow them to. Their words and actions are external events. They only become internal experiences if you choose to absorb them. This insight reshaped Jung's perspective. Most people, he realized, had highly permeable boundaries. They absorbed others' emotions, took on stress, and allowed external situations to dictate their inner world. In contrast, those with strong psychological boundaries filtered what they allowed in. Jung identified 3 types of boundaries they developed. The first was the relevance filter. They only internalized information that supported growth or purpose. The second was the ownership boundary. They clearly distinguished between their emotions and those of others. The third was the identity fortress, a stable sense of self that remained intact despite external criticism. Yet there was a paradox. People with strong boundaries often attracted those who lacked them. Emotionally unstable individuals were drawn to their stability. Those seeking validation or reaction found their calm presence both frustrating and compelling. Heinrich noticed this pattern himself. He observed that once he stopped reacting, people seemed to try harder to provoke him. It was as if his calm unsettled them more than anger ever had. Jung interpreted this as a form of emotional dependence. Reactive individuals often rely on others' responses to regulate their own feelings. When that feedback is absent, they are forced to confront their own instability. The boundary fortress, therefore, was not just protection. It was a transformation in how one related to the world, no longer as a passive recipient of external forces, but as an active curator of internal experience. In the end, Jung's most unsettling discovery was not about controlling anger, but about transcending it entirely. It revealed that emotional reactions are not inevitable, that triggers can become teachers, and that true psychological strength lies not in resistance, but in awareness and choice. Here is your revised version with slight wording changes, proper formatting, and structure preserved. First comes the emotional firewall. Before entering any social situation, you deliberately decide which emotions you are willing to experience and which you will simply observe without absorbing. Second is response selection. You pre-decide how you will deal with common triggers. Instead of reacting impulsively in the moment, you execute a pre-planned response aligned with your values. Third is the identity anchor. You maintain such a strong and clear sense of who you are that external opinions become interesting information rather than threats to your self-image. Now consider how this plays out in real life. David, a software engineer, was constantly under pressure due to his demanding boss. Using Jung's boundary fortress approach, David set up an emotional firewall before work each day. He chose to observe his boss's stress without taking it in. He pre-selected calm, professional responses to criticism, and he anchored his identity in his competence and growth, not in his boss's approval. Within a few weeks, David reported feeling almost untouchable at work. His boss's moods no longer disrupted his performance or inner peace. More importantly, his boss began treating him with greater respect, as if recognizing David's new psychological strength. This reveals the paradox Jung identified about boundary fortresses. The stronger your internal boundaries, the more others tend to respect them. People can sense psychological stability and often adjust their behavior accordingly. But Jung's most unsettling insight about emotional impermeability involved what he called projection reversal. His psychologically resilient patients had learned to see through emotional attacks and recognize the hidden wounds driving them. Heinrich demonstrated this clearly during one of Jung's sessions. A business rival had publicly humiliated him, calling him a heartless profiteer who cared nothing for his workers. Instead of reacting with anger or defense, Heinrich felt curiosity. "Doctor," Heinrich explained, "this man's attack revealed everything about his psychology and nothing about mine." His accusation of heartlessness exposed his own fear of being seen as unfeeling. His focus on profit reflected his financial insecurity. His concern for workers showed his guilt about his own behavior toward employees. Jung realized Heinrich had developed what he described as psychological X-ray vision, the ability to look beyond surface attacks and understand deeper emotional dynamics. When someone attacks you, they are often revealing something about themselves, not about you. This realization was unsettling because it suggested that much of human conflict is rooted in projection. People are not truly fighting each other, they are reacting to their own unresolved issues reflected outward. Jung observed this pattern repeatedly. Criticism about appearance often comes from those insecure about their looks. Attacks on success arise from those frustrated with their own progress. Judgments about life choices come from individuals uncertain about their own decisions. But Jung also found something even more challenging. Once you clearly see these projections, it becomes extremely difficult to take personal attacks personally. Instead, you begin to feel compassion for the pain driving others' behavior. Heinrich described this transformation. "Doctor, when someone attacks me now, I see a wounded child expressing pain. How can I feel anger toward a child for crying? Instead, I feel curiosity about what hurt them and whether I can help." This represents the highest level of psychological immunity. When you interpret attacks as expressions of pain rather than judgments of your worth, you become largely unaffected by them. The projection reversal method involves 3 guiding questions. When someone attacks you, ask yourself, what quality are they criticizing in me? Where might they struggle with this same quality? And what fear or pain could be driving their behavior? Consider a real example. Lisa, a graphic designer, felt deeply hurt when a client called her work unprofessional and amateur. Using projection reversal, she asked herself what was being criticized: her professionalism. Then she considered where the client might struggle with this issue. She recalled the client mentioning feeling like an imposter in their industry. She then asked what fear might be driving this reaction: the fear of their own inadequacy being exposed. This understanding transformed Lisa's response. Instead of internalizing the criticism, she saw it as a projection of the client's insecurity and responded calmly while maintaining her inner balance. However, Jung warned about a potential downside. Once you can see through people's psychological defenses so clearly, maintaining genuine relationships can become more difficult. You may begin to feel as if you are surrounded by wounded individuals rather than equal peers. Heinrich experienced this sense of isolation. "Doctor, sometimes I feel like I am the only adult in a world of hurt children. I can see everyone's pain so clearly that I struggle to take their behavior seriously." Jung recognized this as the cost of deep psychological clarity. Understanding human nature at this level can lead to emotional distance if not balanced with compassion. The challenge, he believed, was to maintain empathy while seeing clearly, to understand others' pain without disconnecting from them. Jung's final insight into emotional impermeability was perhaps the most profound. His patients had not only learned to avoid being triggered, they had developed what he called emotional alchemy, the ability to turn every trigger into psychological growth. Heinrich explained this shift. "Doctor, I no longer see difficult people as problems to avoid. I see them as teachers, bringing exactly the lessons I need for growth. The more someone triggers me, the more valuable they are to my development." This represented a complete reversal of typical human behavior. Instead of avoiding discomfort, Heinrich actively used it as a tool for self-improvement. Instead of seeing difficult people as enemies, he viewed them as unconscious contributors to his development. Jung understood this as the highest stage of emotional resilience, transforming external challenges into internal progress. Heinrich described a consistent method. When triggered, he would immediately ask himself, "What is this situation teaching me? What weakness is being exposed? And what part of myself needs attention or growth?" This level of development created individuals who were extremely difficult to manipulate or control emotionally. They had turned every vulnerability into a potential strength. You likely recognize this truth at some level. External praise cannot inflate you when you do not depend on it. External criticism cannot diminish you when you use it as feedback for growth. Emotional alchemy operates through 3 processes. First is trigger mining, extracting insight from situations that disturb your peace. Second is shadow integration, using others' behavior to identify and address your own psychological patterns. Third is strength synthesis, transforming discovered weaknesses into strengths. Consider Marcus, a sales manager who felt constantly frustrated by his team's lack of motivation. Instead of simply managing his reactions, he applied emotional alchemy. He asked himself what their behavior was teaching him, that he expected others to share his drive without understanding their motivations. He then asked what weakness this revealed: his inability to inspire effectively. Finally, he asked what strength he could develop: the ability to motivate through connection rather than pressure. Marcus used this realization to grow. He studied motivation, connected with his team on a deeper level, and eventually became one of the most effective leaders in his company. His frustration became the catalyst for his growth. However, Jung also noted a darker side. Those who mastered emotional alchemy sometimes became so focused on self-development that they lost sensitivity toward others still struggling with basic emotional challenges. They risked becoming psychologically elevated but emotionally distant. Heinrich described this tension. "Doctor, sometimes I feel as if I am conducting a psychological experiment rather than living a human life. Every interaction becomes analysis instead of connection." Jung concluded that the final challenge was maintaining humanity while achieving psychological mastery. The goal was not invulnerability, but adaptability, becoming stronger and more compassionate through each experience. True resilience required accepting both strength and vulnerability. It meant using insight not to separate from others, but to connect more meaningfully. The final stage of emotional alchemy, which Jung described as compassionate immunity, involved using one's inner stability to support others rather than distance from them. Heinrich eventually learned to use his emotional strength as a bridge rather than a barrier. When his wife expressed frustration, he could remain steady while allowing her to feel heard. When his employees brought him problems, he could listen fully without absorbing their stress. This revealed the deeper purpose of emotional immunity. It was not about escaping human connection, but about engaging with it from a place of stability. Jung referred to this final stage as the compassionate warrior, someone who remains unshaken while still caring deeply for others. Heinrich's transformation into this state was gradual. Initially, his calm created distance. People found it unsettling, but over time, he learned that true emotional strength also involves making others feel safe and understood. "Doctor," he reflected, "I realized my immunity was incomplete if it only protected me. Real strength means creating space for others to experience their emotions while I remain centered." Jung observed how Heinrich applied this in daily life. He listened without judgment, responded without reactivity, and supported others without losing his balance. This is the final paradox of emotional resilience. It requires staying fully human, not rising above humanity. The compassionate warrior can witness pain without absorbing it, face chaos without becoming chaotic, and offer support without being drained. The technique that emerged from Jung's observations resembles emotional aikido, using the energy of others' emotions constructively rather than resisting or absorbing it. When someone brings anger, you guide it toward solutions. When someone expresses sadness, you respond with empathy and understanding. In this way, emotional immunity becomes not just protection, but transformation, a way of living that turns every interaction into an opportunity for awareness, growth, and deeper human connection.